I'm so excited to be showing you how I made this larger tote bag using the jelly roll strips like I do with my rugs. So first you start off with your fabric. I made this with the thought of using jelly roll strips. So these strips are going to be 2.5 inches wide by 44 inches long generally. Jelly roll fabric can vary from 40, 42, 44 depending, but usually it's around 44. I myself am using fat quarters, and what I'm doing is I cut up my fat quarter fabric and I am sewing them together because they're only 22 inches wide, so I want them to be longer. So I'm doing two sets here, and that's what you're seeing here is I'm sewing them diagonal. So you can totally cut your own fabric or do what you would like with these projects, or use the pre-cut bundles that are called jelly rolls, and then you'll have your fabric strips ready, and that's what we're going off of. So if you don't have to sew your fabric together and you're just using jelly roll strips, next up, you're adding the batting. I like using this handy tool here. It's called the Gypsy Tube Maker, and all this does is it folds my fabric together. You don't need one of these tools to do these projects, but it just makes it easier. Or you can use the popular Clover tool, and it does the same thing, except for it just has two pieces instead of this one. So that's all I'm doing here is I'm adding the batting with the fabric, and then I'm going to be folding the outsides into the middle, and then it gets folded in half again, and that's going to be my tube for my project here. So you can see how it all fits together here, and then I'm just going to fold it in half again, and then it's all ready to be sewn. And I'm going to sew mine down the side. I like doing a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so it's going to be down here to close it. Here's what it looks like. You don't have to do it down the side. You can do it down the middle if you'd like. This just makes it look a certain way, and this is how I like mine. So over to the sewing machine, you can see here I'm sewing up each of the fabric strips into the fabric tubes here. And I'm going to go through and do that. I used 30 for the bulk of my bag because I am making a huge bag. So I'm using 30 of the jelly roll fabric strips. I'm using my magnetic seam guide up at the top. This is helping me to get a straight edge, and a walking foot helps too. Those sets up there I have 2 of. They are my side panels for my bag. I'm using 3 jelly roll strips or tubes, for those each. And then I'm using 2 jelly roll strips for my binding. Next up, I have to sew all of these tubes together. So what you do is you first rearrange it how I showed previously, all how you want the fabric to be in the pattern, and organize it. Then I'm going to go one by one and add these tubes together, sewing them with a zigzag stitch like shown here. My settings are at 5 and 2.5 for the zigzag stitch. When you are sewing these tubes together, you don't want the material to overlap. You don't want to tug, push, or pull. That's why I think the walking foot really helps with this. It just glides the fabric through and you get a nice even zigzag stitch. Having your tubes be nice and even when you sew them too, I think helps a lot. That's why I like doing it at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I just feel like I get a better quality size even tube. I've added more to them, and you can see here I'm working on my 5th one. Now, I'm doing this one in sets of 5. That's what I chose. It's recommended to do these in sets of 2 or 4, just sets of them. So the reason why that is, with working with these long strips, it's easy for these to end up getting a little wonky and the tension being off. And when you're adding one by one, if there's just slight tension, it ends up adding up on each one, and then in the end you might have some variances where you're going to see your fabric shifting and not being straight, and we don't want that. You totally can do one by one. I have done smaller rectangular rugs like that, which is essentially like kind of what we're building here, a big long rectangular piece using these tubes. But to be safe, I went and did the sets of them in panels. You really want to just take your time with these. I'm just slowly easing the fabric through, making sure that it's staying nice and even and straight, as you can see, because you really want these to come out as straight as possible. So over on the left here, you can see that I have my first panel here. It's 5 strips, and then I'm working on my next section, and it's going to be another 5. It looks like I only have 4 there, but it's going to be another 5. And then I'm going to go through and do that with all of them. And so I am working with 30 strips for the bulk of my bag. That is going to be the main part of my bag. Here is a close-up of me sewing this together. Now I'm showing this in real time. I do tend to sew a little bit fast. I've been making these things for a while now, and I'm a little bit impatient. But I am showing you in real time how I'm sewing this. I am taking my time to show you with this, making sure that that zigzag stitch gets on both sides. You want the fabric to just go in there nice and evenly. Now I have all of my panels ready, and you can see they're fairly straight. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my iron and I'm going to make sure that they're nice and straight all throughout. And what I'm doing here is just pushing and pulling the fabric a little bit. Then I'm taking my iron and I'm flattening out just to kind of ensure that it stays nice and straight. These are really long, so it's easy for them to get a little wonky and move a little. It's fabric, so it's going to do that, and that's all right. But we definitely want them as straight as possible for when we're sewing. Just makes it easier for when it comes all together. So this is what I did to kind of help with that. Make sure you remember the order your fabric. I tried to keep mine in order, but I have a feeling I probably messed it up. But that's all right because of all the pattern. It worked out really great anyway. So now I'm ready to sew the panels together. So here's what I'm doing. I'm matching them all up. It's okay if some of them are not completely flush. We're going to be trimming off the ends anyway. And with this fabric, I have noticed that sometimes you're going to get longer pieces. So when I'm starting up at the top, they're generally, you can see, kind of nice and even-ish. But like I said, you're going to trim that off later, so it's all right. So that's what I'm doing here, continuing with the same zigzag stitch, and I'm adding the panels together. Just taking my time, going nice and slow, making sure that they're nice and even so that we get a nice straight, like rectangular rug here to work with, because I'm going to just be folding it in half, and that's going to be my handbag. Here is another angle, so you can see I kind of have it folded up in my lap here. As you work with bigger projects, it does get a little bit more difficult to work with and to make sure that that fabric is going through evenly. Just be sure to take your time and watch as you're sewing. Sometimes you can start to feel like a little bit of a drag, so you want to readjust your fabric because you don't want that. Especially as it grows over here on the left, it gets a little bit difficult to push it through. So you just got to pay attention as you're working with it. I think that will help to keep it kind of straight. If you get too much drag on one side, on like say the left side where all the bulk is, then you're going to start possibly having your the material on your right feeding in. It can end up being like not centered right and then pulling or tugging, and then you're going to get that shift in the fabric because your tension is off with your stitches, and it might start to curve or bend in certain areas. So just pay attention to like how the fabric is really moving as you're working it through, because you really want to focus on it being nice and level and even on both sides as you're pushing it through your machine, just letting your machine do the work, but you also need to help it when it starts getting larger. So from this angle, you can see how I'm holding it with both my hands and gently gliding it, trying to keep it nice and even as much as possible. That really is the main goal here, is just to sew it nice and even so we get this nice rectangular shape and it's not all wonky. Now as I'm getting down to the end, you can see what I mean when I said it wasn't going to be even. That's totally fine. These are all going to be trimmed after. Here I am adding the very last panel, and again you can see up the top how some of the pieces are a little bit longer. Working with the fabric, like I said, I've noticed that some of the pieces are a little bit longer than others and some are shorter, so just pay attention as you're sewing, making sure that you're not going to be too far off. You want them generally to be about in the same area so we can keep the most of the length that we want, because I'm aiming for 40 inches, but most of the fabric here was 44 inches. So all of those ends are going to be trimmed off nice and even after we're done sewing here. Here is what it looks like. I'm pretty excited with it. I absolutely love the colors. Next up, we're working with the side panel. I didn't want a boxy look. I wanted more of a curved look, so this is what I came up with for the sides. What I'm doing is I'm taking one of the fabric strips that I made into a tube, and I'm bending it in half and then creating a little bend up at the top, as you can see, and I'm pinning it. So this is just folded evenly like this. Next up, I'm going to add my next fabric tube, and I'm going to make sure it's even again. So I'm placing it like this and making sure down at the bottom here that they're kind of level across, like this. It doesn't matter. They're going to be uneven at the bottom down there, like this. As long as those two are matching, I'm happy. But the rest of it is going to be trimmed as well, so I don't need to worry about that. So I'm going to go up here, and I'm going to just get the fabric to lay nicely. It's kind of like when you're doing around the corners with the rugs. And same thing, you want that fabric to be bunched up in the middle so that you get a nice flat curve when you sew it together. So I'm going to go through, and I'm going to pin it together like this. You can see here what it looks like. This is with two of the strips together. Now I'm going to add one more. So this is the final one. I'm using 3 of the fabric strips that I made into the fabric tubes for my side panels. So you'll need that twice because we're doing 2 side panels. Again, I'm making sure that the ends are kind of even. Like I said, they're going to get trimmed off, but you want each one on the side to be even. I'm going to go around here, and I'm going to, again, just bunch that material up and make sure that it lays all nice in there and pin it. I didn't use a lot of pins. You can use more if you'd like. Whatever you need to do. You can even go in and iron this lightly before you sew it. But I'm very familiar with working with this material in these projects like this, so I'm just kind of lightly pinning it, and I'm going to adjust when I take it to the sewing machine. So this is what you're looking for. This is the side panel for my bag. This is 1. I'm going to sew down the middle here like this with my zigzag stitch, and then I'm going to sew down each of these ones in a U shape all the way around, and I'm going to do that twice. So here are my 2 side panels for my large handbag. Here I am sewing down the middle of my first side panel, and I'm again using the same zigzag stitch. I'm using 5 and 2.5 on my machine, and I'm going down the middle here, and it's a little bit of a pain because I got to move all of those pins out of the way because I don't like sewing over them. And so you're just going to go all the way down to the bottom, and I'm doing this in real time just to show you how I work here. It's all right if you work faster or slower, whatever you need to do that works for you is totally fine. As I'm taking the pins out, I'm putting them up near the top just because I already took some out and I want them to stay secure and not move too much. So that's what I'm doing here. Now I flipped it around and started from the end, and you're basically doing like a U shape, and that's what I'm doing here. I'm doing the next fabric tube and attaching it. I'm going all the way down to the end, and then I'll be doing around the corner and show you how that works here once I get down there. So here I am at a different angle so you can see the whole thing here. I'm cruising down here, getting down to there, making sure that I adjust it. You want it nice and even. Don't want it to be curved or anything like that, so I just adjusted. Now coming down here, I probably should have moved that bag in the back. So sewing down here at the curve here, you just want to take your time a lot and just really focus on where that zigzag stitch is going. At times I do stop and put my needle down and pivot it if I need to. I just really take my time around those corners here just to make sure that everything lays nice and flat. You really got to punch that material up and just take your time readjusting as you see, making sure that I don't go over any pins. A little bit more tricky here because I got so many pins in there and a lot going on. So I'm just going to continue all the way down here, and you can see that U-shaped pattern here that I did to attach the second fabric tube. I'm not worrying about the way this looks down here at the bottom because I'm going to trim it after, so that's not a worry. Now I'm going to go and I'm going to do the last row here. I'm going to sew it on together. So I'm going to start again, a U shape, and working down through it, zigzagging it together. And then once this is done, it's going to be my side panel for my bag. So again, it's 3 fabric strips that I made into tubes and made them into a little U shape here like that. And that is my side panel for my bag. And you need 2 of them. And then we sew them all together like this. And I'm going to go down at the bottom here and do that curve again at the bottom of the U here, bunching up the fabric like that, making sure it lays nicely. You can totally use more pins if you'd like. Like I said, I'm just used to doing this, so I don't use as many. If you go too fast around the corners, you'll end up getting a little bit of wonky stitching. So going slow really helps, I think, to keep those zigzag stitches nice and neat and even on both sides. You kind of want to just pivot it just slightly as with each new stitch as you're going around. So even I still have little holes in my project. So all we're doing is we're just going to go in and go over it again and fix it. Easy as that. And now it's nice and secure. And this is what the fabric panel on the side is going to look like for the handbag. And then you just need 2 of those. So now that I have the bulk of my bag ready here, I have my 2 side panels and then I have 2 strips for binding. Next, I'm going to go in and I'm going to trim my bag. I'm using a grid mat and this really helps me to get a nice and even. And I'm going to go and I'm going to find my lowest, you can see right there, the lowest one of the strips of the fabric tubes there. And I'm going to use that as my base to start to cut from. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm making sure that everything's nice and square and lined up. And then I'm going to use my rotary cutter and I'm going to cut through this so that I have a nice even cut down the edge. And then I'm going to do that with the other side as well. I'm not measuring, I'm just kind of like to use what I have, but it generally gives me about the size 40 inches. I decided to add this angle because I thought it was hilarious as I was fighting to add these side panels on just to show you the amount of work it takes for these bags. It is a little tricky to get everything in there and to fold it all up and to get those panels in. I'm telling you, I know it's not easy, but I think it's so worth it because I just like the style and the way that it came out. So I feel like it's totally worth the struggle to get it all to come together nicely. The first time I made one of these bags, it was quite the struggle. I was really having a hard time, but I think I found some ways that make it a little bit better and a little easier. I was a little tired here. This bag has taken me forever, it felt like, but I'm so excited that I finally got it done, and I'm happy to share with you guys my process. I do find that having to videotape everything, well, obviously not having to, but videotaping things does take an extra level of work too, as you're trying to figure everything out and trying to remember everything and write everything down and what I want to go through. I didn't get every angle of this bag as I was sewing the panels on, but I do have another video with my smaller handbag showing step by step how to do each side panel, which is essentially what I'm doing, exactly the same here, just larger. What I do too is I just roll the fabric up as I am doing it. I'm adding the second one on, the second panel here, and you can see how I have to kind of squish really the fabric up here because it's awfully bulky, so you just got to kind of roll it together to try to get it so you can sew. I know it seems odd to have all the bulk of it over on the right side here, but this is the way that I found easiest to attach these side panels. So I just make sure that I keep my needle down every time I go to adjust so that it doesn't slide. And I just try my best to get this side panel on. I did forget to mention that I learned from my last bag that after cutting off the ends to go back through and to sew the ends of that to have a nice secure end stitch at both ends. So that way it won't rip the material out, because the last bag I did, I had that issue and we don't want to have that issue again. So when you're sewing these side panels on, you really need to just adjust and move the bag as needed as you're doing it. Kind of just slowly getting that fabric to come out. You can see I'm pulling it through, just adjusting and folding it and moving it as needed. I'm always leaving my needle down just so that way it doesn't slide. It will make a mess if you do like that and it moves on you. Down at the curve here, and it is a little tricky, but really if you just focus on those little bit right in front of the foot as you're doing it, I think it really helps. It's all you're doing is focusing on getting that fabric to close up next to it. And so with the curve, I am kind of squishing the fabric together, a little bit of a bunching, not too much. I'm adjusting, moving as needed, and just closing it up together. You can see just right in the front of the foot there, just little by little, and adjusting as needed so I can get that fabric around. It's all right if it's not laying right next to it, because as we're working on it, it's going to come all together nicely. I'm just going to continue just slowly closing that up together, cinching it together here, as you can see, using both my left and right hand, and just stitch by stitch going slowly and squeezing it all together. Once I get around that curve here, it gets a little bit easier and it's not as difficult. Got to maneuver it again to get it so that I can get that straight side down here so I can continue sewing it. So again, just moving it as needed. And now the easier part. I got through the hardest part. So now it's just closing this up like a little zipper here, just going all the way down through. And with any luck, it's going to line up perfectly. So I do adjust it slightly. So as I'm coming down here, I make sure that it lines up at the bottom of the top of the other one. And I did end up like squishing my fabric a little on one just to make sure that it lined up perfectly, because I did not want to rip it out again. With this one, how I measured the panel was a whole inch down from the shortest tube over here, the far one. See over here down at the left behind my left hand right there? That's where I measured to start. It was an inch down from my fabric where the actual pattern starts. And then it lined up really nicely. And then I just cut those sections off. You can see them hanging up there. Then I cut them to make them even on both sides. I do have more detailed explanation and video of those panels on my previous smaller handbag video. Next up, I'm adding the binding to the top, and I'm using my Gypsy tube maker again to help me fold it. And it's folding it in half, and then I'm going to fold it in half again. And I'm ironing it just to make sure that everything stays nice and neat. And this is going to be my binding that is going to go around the top of my entire handbag. So here I started adding my binding, going all the way around using clips like this. Just find an area to start. I kind of started like 3/4 of the way in, or a quarter of the way in, however way you look at it here, and then wrap it all the way around. And you want to make sure that it's nice and tight, it's not loose and flumpy like. And then I go ahead and I add some clips and I go all the way around. Then when I'm done, I like to go in and measure both sides to make sure that they're even, because if they're not even, my stitches are not going to get both sides. And then here at the end, I have about 1/2 inch to 1 inch overlap, and I'm just tucking it in. That's all I'm doing, nothing too fancy, just tucking it in, making sure my end is folded in so it's it's not like a raw edge of the fabric, you know? That's it, that's all I'm doing. If you have other ways to do the binding, you can totally do it other ways. This is just how I kind of learned on my own to do it here, and in what I wanted for this bag. If you want to add a lining, I added the lining before I add the binding up here. That's what I went back and decided to change after this. So what I did was I just sewed a regular stitch all the way down along the edge here. Um, it doesn't matter exactly what length you want. I don't like it too close to the edge because I'm not very straight always, so I did maybe a 1/4 inch or so, a little bit more from the left side in. I probably am not doing things completely the right way, but I kind of just wing it really when I do things and learn as I go and find what works and just make sure that everything's nice and sewn together. You know what I mean? And making sure everything looks good and secure. Next up is adding the handles. So I'm starting off here. This was the bulk of my bag. This was where I started, the 20 strips, and that's the end, my side panel. So how I'm counting is I'm starting with the first strip here of my handbag, the bulk of it, and I'm counting in over to 8, and that's where I wanted to put mine. You can put yours wherever you want. You don't have to use these kind of handles even. You can make your own too. So doing these is a pain, hurts my wrists, but I love it. It looks so pretty. So I did use the wrong kind of thread. I'm going to go get some upholstery thread and redo this. So, and I may even try figuring out how to do it with my machine because this hand stitching, ugh. But basically what I did was I am doing every other stitch here and then going back through and doing yeah, see, fun. Doing every other stitch back the other way. And what that's doing is just giving it a nice secure stitch. But you definitely with this bigger bag need a better, stronger thread because, you know, look at this thing. It's huge, but it's obnoxious and I absolutely love it. It's exactly what I wanted. And here is the lining that I added. I'm going to show a video of how I did that. I am no professional, guys, but I'm just sharing my journey as I go along. I hope you like it too. Thanks for watching.